G'day friends and fans, and welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for 18th of August 2025. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood Arcade, Power Games, Into the Elsbound, and The Erotic Tales from the Empire. Part 1 is available now. All my books available on Amazon. Thank you to those that support the channel. You can support the channel by joining my patrons, buying my books, buying my merch. All my links are in the link tree, which you can scan now or wait till after the show. Alright, now for the news. Now, I appreciate that many people do not see the Ukraine war as their war. That's fine. But there are many who do, and that, well, you're hypocrites if you didn't actually fight in it. You're not Ukrainian. I mean, there are so many people who seem to think that they're sticky beaks, stick their business into others. But they don't pay the price. Ukraine is paying the price. And the thing is, what's Zelensky going to do for you? And really, why do you care? You're not saving lives. You're not saving democracy. Zelensky is not an elected leader. He stayed in office after his term expired. The very thing that everybody accused Trump was going to do. Hold on. Gosh. Right. And of course, what else is there? What else is... You want basically to endlessly give Zelensky money? Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? They want to feel good about themselves. How do they do it? By giving other people's money to other people. It's very cheap. But Ukraine, after all, now seems to be coming to an end. Even Lindsey Graham has said the land swaps will end the war. Of course, Marco Rubio today had to respond multiple times to many questions. One, Marco Rubio says the Ukraine conflict is not our war. And that as for concerns about Ukraine being bullied into a deal, too bad, so sad. Well, those weren't exactly his words, because both sides are going to have to make a compromise. And if they don't compromise and they don't make a deal, the US is going to walk away. And if Europe wants to pick up the slack, the US won't stand in the way. But Trump said they won't hear from him again. Basically, he'll hang Russia out to dry, and he's going to hang Zelensky out to dry. Too bad, so sad. I agree, because as far as I'm concerned, there's no use caring about Ukraine if Ukraine only cares about killing Russians, and they don't care how many Ukrainian lives it costs. And you may think, oh, but it's not your country to give away. It's not Ukraine's country anymore to give away either. Damn, I just realised that. Where do I put it? Alright, I'll do it next. Okay, I'll load the road map. What, in the background? Well, I forgot. I'm sorry. Alright, Putin has agreed to a deal. Only scant information has come out. There's a short video, apparently, of Putin presenting this to the to the president. I think it's the Security Commission for Russia. It's not clear when it was broadcast, but it was on Telegram originally. But it's but like a lot of things, Telegram floods and you lose track of these, but this is the best one I could find, okay? That Putin shook hands with Trump, looked him in the eye, and agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine. They can even be, as they quote unquote, robust security guarantees. That includes Article 5. So Russia's preparing to risk war to settle the Ukraine war. That's the best outcome anybody can actually hope for. Though they opposed NATO, there's an alternative. If the Ukrainians can live with it. Remember, it's up to a referendum now in Ukraine. Voldemort has to agree to the US offers. He is going to talk with both Trump and European leaders. They didn't exactly say what format, but apparently the European leaders are going to be on some sort of conference call before, during, and after. And then Zelensky's going back to London and then to Brussels. But that's upset some people, but I'll get to that later. The main part to take away, that the Ukrainians are offered an alternative to NATO. So, make of that what you will, but it sounds like Ukraine won't be a NATO member, but a new protectorate, like the deal they offered Japan, which I don't know if Japan or Australia or anybody else. It's weird. Some of these diplomatic things, what they offer them publicly, but they don't explain the details. All right. But, of course, what happened today is not marked on the map. And that is, there was a attack in Kursk. Not Kursk, sorry. I should know how to pronounce this, but it slips my mind. Ketch. Sorry. The Ketch Bridge. I kept calling it Kursk, didn't I? Nobody corrected me. Oh, well. I know it doesn't probably matter, but and that you knew what I meant. But there was also, all right. So there was bombings today and fighting along the front line, including areas. So the proposed land swap may include these little blue areas. These, because now this is the thing. Neither side has clarified what they mean by the land swap in Sunni, but you can see there's blue areas and red areas. That's Ukrainian occupation of Russia and Russian occupation of Ukraine. And as you can see, Russia hit Sunni hard. Now, they didn't mention this area, but I think that it probably does include this and this little bit here. Now, when it comes to the deal, as you can see, they're still fighting, and Russia hasn't made any significant progress, which again leads me to believe they're fighting off Ukraine or exchanging fire with Ukraine, not moving or retreating. We've seen this happen before, particularly World War I, soldiers in the trench, they'll go, hey, go see if there's still Russians over there. Somebody will pop their head up and some shots get fired. Somebody hits some artillery and then says, hey, let's see if the Russians are still there. They're basically, now and again, they'll settle into peaceful nothingness, okay? Where there'll be weeks of nothingness and then shots fired. Not clarified what's going on, but it's suspected that Ukraine did fire a drone at it. Okay. Now, Zelensky said this as well, if Russia was serious, they would stop putting pressure on Ukraine to give up the Donbass. Now, as you know, Lugansk is all but liberated, right? 99.9%, although, that little segment is no man's ground. You got Lugansk and Donetsk. Russia wants 100% of these two, apparently, and they're prepared to give up this. So they're not going to take the rest of Kherson or Zaporozhye. But the land they have taken will help form the border. So any town they occupy is going to be Russian. But these open grounds between them, right, like this, may not be included. So they're going to have surveyors and experts and all sorts of people behind the scenes. Which probably explains why Russia hasn't closed the gap here, unless because they don't need it in a land swap and they don't need it to secure their border. In fact, they probably want to keep. The probably reason the only way they're fighting there is to keep the Ukrainians bogged down to stop them attacking them on their flanks as they take a few towns. Now, the deal does not say the fate of these towns or the territory Russia hasn't currently taken. But as you can see, very little movement on the map, but lots of fighting. Ukraine is reluctant, of course, to give up territory, and we'll get to that shortly, but as you can see, Russia hasn't made any significant advances, and of course, as usual today, the maps decide that they're going to load slowly. But however, what you would call the outline of Putin's offer: land swap and security guarantees. Now, here's the thing. Russia has also been after security guarantees because he says it's not about today. It's not even about the next government. It's about the successive governments with the installed idea that they will, in the future, so-called liberate, right? And we've seen this before, that they want guarantees that Ukraine won't start a war to liberate former territories. That they want Ukraine to recognize that before they were Ukrainian, they were Russian, and that they have been returned to Russia. It's also reject. So, however, Ukraine has rejected this straight away. But Putin also wants official. This is another one. But Ukraine hasn't responded to this one or any other. There's apparently 4 talking points, which I think is down from 10. But it's pretty interesting because Ukraine has made accusations of Russia which have never been verified. Russia has said many times that it does not want or need all of Ukraine, that they would prefer not to occupy Ukraine, that it will relinquish parts in the... but Kiev does not want to cede swaths of land in the east that Moscow has been unable to capture. Well, that's the compromise, I believe. That will be discussed today in the US, then later in London, and then in Brussels for the wording of the counter-proposal to Russia to begin the next round of talks. Each side gives each other a proposal, then they have a sort. It's like a trial, right? US has been the judge. You put in your affidavits, and then you put in your responses to the affidavits, and then what you have is the negotiation, in which people get a ruler and line through. Judges often are involved in this. This is a very complex situation, and at the end of the day, they have to add up the cost. That is ultimately what it comes down to. What will be the cost in man, machine, and is it beneficial Because at the end of the day, Brussels has decided they are no longer prepared to go to war against Russia, which is a good thing. Okay, they realise that the cost of a war, and even if they carve up Russia, they probably facing the Chinese war machine eventually. Because pretty much, if you conquer Russia or break up Russia, you're giving you're giving Xi Jinping the green light to do the same. Remember, everything we do, they can do. That is the absolute minimum standard of world diplomacy. That this is what, if you go back, okay, conquest didn't start with Rome. It didn't start with ancient Greece. Okay, it started in Babylon, when the Semites invaded Babylon, when the Africans invaded each other, and then later Europe. People forget this because most people don't know history. That's fine. But just remember that a conflict begets conflict and has begotten more conflicts since. So many forgotten conflicts out there. That's why you have these Afrocentric groups, these Asian groups who all point the finger and say Western imperialism. Folks, we were late to the party. By the time Rome came around, there had been 5,000 years of Egypt and conquests and wars between North and South, between, Egypt and... So, don't think that little old Africa is an innocent babe in the woods. And don't forget, Russia was conquered by the Mongols. So was parts of Europe. By the way, the Mongols still occupy Turkey, by the way. The Turkmens, most of the people of Turkey, are both the result of the conquest of Turkey by the Turkmens and the subsequent conquest by the Islamic Caliphate, and then later the Ottoman Empire. So, you got a lot of forgetting that Russia fought against the Turks in Crimea. Later, the British invaded. Then the stupid Soviets gave up land to create this new experiment in the so-called Soviet man. And again, without Ukrainians dabbling in socialism, there wouldn't be a Ukraine, because it was part of Russia. Although Russia was willing to and still is willing to cut some of it off and say, well, you're the land in between. You were a result of Russian expansion. You're not really ethnic Russians. You're a mixed Slavic. We're willing to accept, your independence. But independence, not become a European airbase for INSOC to spread. And if you don't know what INSOC is, or want to believe that England is currently under a totalitarian government in the guise of having a legitimate opposition party, and that foreigners do not occupy London, that's up to you, bro. But I'm just telling you what I think and what I see, and giving you the news and my opinion. And in my opinion, Trump is right. Zelensky could win this war almost immediately, right? Zelensky is only agreeing to 2 out of 4 talking points, but he can agree to them all. But of course, the Al Jazeera, it's a high-stakes visit. No, bro. Zelensky's going to be lectured to, and if he has a hissy fit, everybody's going to... Of course, this is the problem. The media is going to side with Zelensky. We cannot give up Crimea. We cannot give up this. But it only emboldens Putin to wage more war, says Zelensky. Then he changed his mind and says he has a strong desire to end this war quickly. But not like when we were forced to give up Crimea and part of the East. No. Because Putin used it as a springboard for a new attack. We want so-called security guarantees. Well, they had security guarantees in 1994, but they didn't work. Why? China was supposed to prevent Russia from going to war. Instead, Xi Jinping pushed Russia into war. Germany, France, and England were meant to defend Ukraine, and then they said no. Obama said no, we're ceding Crimea because it's 90% Russian. What they didn't tell you is the Ukrainians attacked the ethnic Russians in Crimea, and the local population, instead of fleeing for their lives, attacked and killed the Ukrainian security forces. And then the Russians and the base stepped in and arrested the Zelensky government for... what was it, Zelensky government? Sorry. I meant was it Klomominsky or something? Anyway, one of the guys who backed Zelensky was a former governor or something, and you want to know how corrupt Ukraine is? Governors who are billionaires in a country where the average wage is 5,600 pesos. No way do you become a billionaire through honest and legitimate means. Yeah, state enterprises, folks, and run by billionaires. Yeah, basically, though Zelensky is right, there were security guarantees in 94. There were security guarantees but they didn't work because when they were triggered in 2016, Obama said, no, we're not going to. But it was for peace, right? The only reason why there's a war is because in 2019, Zelensky says, I'm going to honor the peace accords. We're going to have peace with Russia. And then by 2022, still with no elections in Ukraine. Remember, there was supposed to be, and set out in 1994, that there were elections for the breakaway republics of Ukraine, which successive governments can't blame Zelensky for that. Okay? This was Merkel and Hollande. They did not honor the Minsk Accords or the Minsk II Accords. Obama ceded Crimea, and then they were told to cede more in 22. But Zelensky is missing out the fact that there was a protest in Donbass, and his military responded by shelling it. And then the Azov battalion illegally occupied Mariupol, and there was the murder of 50 Russians in Odessa, and then Zelensky turned a blind eye to all that, so Putin threatened to invade if he did not rein in the Ukrainian security forces and stop killing ethnic Russians. He responded by daring him to invade and said, you won't invade because you're weak. And then France and Germany says, we'll break up Russia. This is a great opportunity to break up Russia. So Putin has responded with a defensive, offensive war to stop basically Europe from building up. And then Merkel and Hollande admit that the whole thing was set up to drag Russia into a war that they never intended peace. Zelensky's repeatedly ruled out handing over Ukrainian territory. He wants to be forced so he can play the martyr. Now, Ursula von der Leyen was a European commissioner and was there when NATO screwed over Ukraine, screwed over Russia, didn't keep their word to either country, and still hasn't kept their word to anybody. Okay? How many times has Trump forced Europe to keep their word? How many times has Biden just let Europe get by without honouring any trade deal? Okay? European trade deals with the US was so one-sided. Europe stacked up the tariffs, and when Trump told them to remove the tariffs, Ursula added more tariffs. But, of course, the media never tells you about the retaliatory tariffs, or the fact that Zelensky's a lying muppet, and why does he lie for Europe when they screwed over him as well? Well, without Europe, the cokehead has no power, okay? Now, Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister, who also illegally occupied the office and is only out of office because he agreed to take, only because NATO made him the Secretary General, because that's the only reason why he clung to power. That's the problem with Europe, right? They created this uber government so that unelected politicians can sit and have power. No, but of course, leaders, well, right, we have a expanded leadership. It was originally just going to be France, Germany, and the UK, but apparently Finland wants to stick his finger in the pie. Giorgia Meloni, I think she's actually going not because of Ukraine, but because of China's actions in Italy, and of course Italy's facing a existential crisis, and of course they're going to have talks about not just about NATO, but folks, Italy is boiling right now. Okay, a lot of and it's not the sun. The heat's coming up from the earth. The so-called climate change that they keep talking about, bro, the heat's not coming from the sun. It's coming from the earth. Until you wake up and realize that shit is happening. I've made videos on this in the past. They keep getting taken down. They don't want you to know that there's problems in Italy, psychological, population, and Ukraine has the same problems. So does other parts of Europe, and they want solutions. I can give you solutions, but people don't want them, and YouTube doesn't want me to tell you them. It's sad. I may have to, but okay. Big risk. Italy is surrounded by volcanoes. Okay, it's probably if any one of them is that they're all close to population centers. Any one of them could kill millions of people, and Italy's economy is stalled. It can't grow. They've got nothing. Everything they've had over the last 50 years, Olivetti, Italian cars, everything has been stripped systematically from Italy to the point Italians want Italy back. Germans want Germany back. British want Britain back. European leaders are desperate. They want Washington support, but they want security guarantees, not just on Ukraine, but themselves. Ursula, always lying, doesn't want you to know that Europe's facing an existential volcanic crisis, an existential crisis in a population collapse. Feminism was supposed to have a population rebound, that when females had power and we had universal daycare and universal healthcare, women were supposed to repopulate Europe because they've been holding out through the 50s and 60s. But it isn't happening. Instead, we have migrant wave after migrant wave, and they're just taking over. And Ursula von der Leyen and others are panicking because they originally wanted to create a new Uber class of a new middle class of politicians and public servants, Eurocrats. But the Eurocrats aren't having children because they've made life too difficult. They have no humanity in them, right? And they don't want to admit publicly that even Russia had a 1.2% population decline. But that's not war deaths, folks. There are slowly growing the number of problems which are now global, right? We have plagues, depopulation. We are seeing revelations. And Google doesn't, and this is a man-made crisis. Revelations said this isn't created by God, it's created by man. This is a man-made crisis, and Trump, Marco Rubio, and others are trying to unravel the madness that has gripped people. Putin's not a happy man. Trump is not a happy man. Whatever the left tell you is garbage. They're responsible for creating so many problems. Now, we don't need to go into the war because, what does it matter how many bombs dropped here or there? The reality is what is being pursued to end this war so we can end other problems. Well, Putin has released a statement. It's practically all tracks. So let's say 9 out of 10 talking points were discussed. Trump dismissed 1 out of hand straight away. I think that's probably, I would guess that's meddling in the government of Ukraine, to remove certain individuals from office. That's fine. I think that was there just to have a negotiating point for Putin, just so he basically has some negotiating points. If you go to a bank and you want to borrow $1 million, you don't walk in and ask for $1 million. You ask for $1 billion and have them talk you down. And if you get 2, fantastic. I guess, however, called his visit to Alaska timely, useful. It was very, of course, he pissed off a lot of lefties by saying it was very productive, and thanked Donald Trump for listening to him and taking on board Russian concerns. And of course, the usual steamheads, boiled over like a kettle under hit by a flamethrower. But the response by Ukraine, well, I think there's not many independents in Ukraine, but the gloves are off and the knives are out. Many Ukrainian lawmakers want Zelensky removed. That he's the cause of the problem. Now, why would Trump want to keep Zelensky in power? Because I think Trump wants a peaceful transfer of power. He wants Zelensky to step down and transfer power to a new Ukrainian government so that later down the track, Zelensky will disappear. Everybody let bygones be bygones to show that there's peace and stability in Ukraine, while behind the scenes, the nasties, shall we say, behind the scenes, disappear forever. Because they're the problem. Zelensky's the front man, okay? Zelensky has no power. He has some wealth, but most of it's been destroyed, right? Russia has systematically destroyed a lot of Zelensky's wealth. Because he put it into industrials and Ukraine. Took a lot of property in Ukraine, including he used to own a holiday house in Crimea, which Putin sold to cover Zelensky's unpaid property taxes. Zelensky hasn't paid his taxes on property or anything else. Apparently, a lot of Ukrainian politicians owe taxes. Anyway, Germany's top diplomat has said no to troops on the ground, that they'll seek an important role in bringing about peace, but this is also, again, what happens. When it comes to deploying of troops, it's too much of a burden. Why? Well, Germany's given away too much. All the technical assistance to provide Ukraine, and they're going to have to basically say, we'll train up the Ukrainian army, but we're not putting our army in Ukraine. That's too provocative. You know it. But Ukrainians will lapse back to their old ways. You saw what happened last time, right? 94, as soon as they got security guarantees, what did Ukraine do? Nothing. They didn't train up their army. They basically didn't fix any of the corruption. They had the Little Models scandal, which they all turned around and blamed Russia, even though Russian children were the target and victims of trafficking by Ukrainian mafia. The same Ukrainian mafia who allegedly backed Zelensky into office. All these problems stem from the fact that Ukraine is corrupt and refuses to address the corruption. They they now and again they'll put somebody in prison, but it's only a token gesture of oh yeah, we put this guy away for 6 months. He was an undersecretary. No, the corruption doesn't go all the way to the top. But it does. The opposition platform has been banned in Ukraine, and they want Zelensky only via referendums. They don't want Zelensky to be able to make any decisions because he's only the nominal head of Ukraine because the military and the military refuse to enforce the law. Okay, because they are the law under Zelensky. However, Rubio has issued warnings to Ukraine. The conflict is going to get worse if you fail, right? You've been told time and time again to accept the deal. But Rubio said there's no conditions that can be imposed on Ukraine. Ultimately, it's up to them to accept agreement with Russia. Yeah. Now, what he means is our decisions, right? What decisions he made cannot be imposed on Ukraine, that they must voluntarily accept the agreement. After 3.5 years, it's getting worse, not better. Yeah, the Europeans thought the Russian war machine would be worn down by now. And then they could, I said this time and time again, F Troop would come in, go, and the Russians would be forced to retreat because there'd be this million-strong army. Europe couldn't even get 30,000. Most of the volunteers, even as they were sending volunteers and that to Ukraine and building up the Ukrainian army, it's dying faster than they can build it up. Every plan they made was done on the cheap and on the fly with no actual regard for the situations on the ground because they're working to plans designed in 1994, not 20 years later when Putin had rebuilt most of the Russian military. Not behind the scenes. They laughed when he trained thousands of rocket soldiers. They laughed when he trained thousands of drone operators. They laughed when he withdrew T-90s and other tanks and replaced them with, basically replaced artillery on the main gun on the T-90 with machine guns. And they laughed when he deployed MiG-31s with missiles. Who's laughing now? This is the problem. They don't sit down with people like me. They sit down with each other and discuss. They don't sit down with you. And as I said time and time again, politicians think they are special, but they don't have special skills. I've met politicians. Most of them are basically the lesser of society, not the greater of society. They're great at looking good. Orwell warned us about this, but I forget who else did. You got Huxley. Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune. He wrote the entire book warning you about charismatic politicians. He didn't say it was left-wing, right-wing. He said it was politicians, plural, who would anoint themselves emperor. This is what the left do. They go around saying that, Trump's the Nazi, while Ukraine's leader quietly sits in office unelected and refusing elections. Russia sees Trump's offer as a real solution. Now, this guy is probably the closest thing to an alternative voice, right? You're not going to get your Russian opposition speaking out against Putin. Now, you may think he's Putin's puppet, but he runs the Russian Direct Investment Fund. He is the architect of rebuilding the Russian economy. He'll be there in office after Putin has long gone. He'll probably be like the equivalent of chairman of the Fed. Okay, he's somewhat political, but he also has to be somewhat neutral and independent because he has to work with whoever comes along. Eventually he'll be replaced. Okay, these jobs never stay unpolitical for long. But for now, we have somebody in Russia who has a reasonable solution, and that is the problem of peace is economics. The whole war is driven by economics. It was created by Western Ukraine's desire to control Eastern Ukraine and take the oil revenue or whatever revenue Eastern Ukraine had and spend it on themselves and give nothing to the people of Donbass. And when they spoke up, they attacked them with militia, illegal private militia. This is basically what happened with Missouri and Virginia Raiders and all these things that led to the American Civil War, was that there wasn't just a political standoff between North and South. There were a lot of greedy opportunists on the sideline who history won't even name them, but you got the Missouri Raiders who routinely went into other states and stole cattle because the South was in crises, and they were taking opportunity of the every time they would come, they took advantage of the opportunity that the Confederate would protect them. People seem to think that Russia-Ukraine war started overnight. A lot of people seem to think the American Civil War started overnight. There's a lot of these conflicts that are a long time in the making, and sometimes we miss them, sometimes we see them. But Ukraine built up a network of infiltrators and spies and saboteurs across Russia. Russia saw the war coming and responded to it. Ukraine was building up its weapons on Russian borders. Ukraine was building up its espionage. Russia was finding this is before there was a war, before the conflict. This whole situation is because Ukraine's special services illegally took over the Ukrainian government, installed puppet after puppet, and Ukraine's leader, Zelensky, is just the latest puppet. A lot of people in Ukraine have openly said, we can't find anybody who voted for Zelensky. There's no way he won the popular vote. A lot of people may not want to admit they voted for Zelensky, of course. Like a lot of people won't admit they voted for Biden or Obama because they regret it. I think regret is something that Ukrainians have for many governments, not just Zelensky. And I think attacks on gas pipelines, bridges, gives Ukraine no right to complain about what targets Russia selects to retaliate with. And they do retaliate. Now, we don't exactly have a timeline, but let's look. This was about 5 hours ago. So let's say 6. Damn it. Frozen up. Gone to sleep. Okay. Come on. The browser's not supposed to fall asleep. Here we go. Yeah, okay. An hour ago, Ukraine attacked. Okay, so we go back. Right. There's no mention 5 hours ago. When did these were... Okay. So there was a bridge bombing which would have been put in place, right? The news cycle. So Russia responds with missile attacks on Zaporozhye and that, which were probably going ahead anyway. Let's be honest that most of these drone attacks were planned 24 to 48 hours ahead of time. But let's say, they attacked pretty much at the same time key military targets. Probably, and then let's say they attack key military targets first, like, and then when they tried to blow up the Kursk Bridge, Russia hit the oil depot at Odessa, and then Ukraine, of course, responds by hitting a gas station. This is economic tit for tat. Okay. Ukraine is not an innocent victim. They're not interested in peace. They had a peace conference, a call with Trump. Zelensky coming to the White House, and what do? They attack the Kursk Bridge anyway, simply so they can thumb their nose at Putin, so that when Zelensky sits down in the White House, he can say, "Look at what the Russian devils did to me. They're not interested in peace." And you think Trump doesn't know these timelines? He probably knows exactly when that bridge explosion went off. Probably has a briefing of 100 or so things and goes through the important list and says, "Boil it down to me for a one-page brief," right? You know, America spends $100 billion gathering intelligence daily for a one-page briefing every day for the president. So there's a lot of things that are going to be missed out. But what there is that there are actually hundreds of these briefings. So if something comes up, the press secretary goes through the briefings and go, "Yeah, the president was briefed on." I'm not calling it a liar. I'm just saying the president has been briefed on, and then we'll brief the media, and if the president needs to know more, he'll know more, because there's an entire briefing on each individual incident. But you can't pretty much, right? The president has to juggle priorities. This is why they want to take the Ukraine war off the list. That's why they want to take Gaza off the list. That's why Trump has been solving problems, because he's taking problems off the list. And that list reduces the problems in the world, so we can focus on more important problems and actually feed people and actually get farm production back up, to get people back to work, to actually... No, we are reaching peak productivity. That's a given, okay? And we're only going, and there are situations where we're going to see technological changes over the next 10 to 24 years. And within 50 years, we're going to see AI pretty much probably run our legal system, and a few others, probably medical diagnosis. Doctors will, basically have a AI system. There'll be most intelligent here will be gone, replaced with AI operators. While there'll be a few universities and some basically skill preserving courses out there. But if the US doesn't do AI, China will, Japan will. Everybody is, it's basically, it's push or be pushed. If you're not pushing out, you're getting pushed back. And this idea that you can unite the world into one singular entity, you're always going to have someone somewhere. You're going to always have a leader who's going to favour his hometown. You've seen this in the United States. Look at Biden, how he favoured Delaware. You look at California, how desperate they are to get Gavin Newsom in office so he can turn on the spigot and flood California with federal cash. They actually said that, by the way. They want Gavin Newsom, I forget who it was. Was it Kamala? Hey, we'll get Gavin in office, and we'll pay off the Californian debt. Gavin Newsom inherited a working economy with a surplus, and he turned it into a deficit, and the highest homeless, etc. It's just like when Zelensky came to office. He promised all these things, and he bankrupted Ukraine within within a year. And this is before a war, by the way. Okay, Ukraine was bankrupted before the war. Don't let them fool you. But that's the situation. And as I said, there's a land grab because I think Putin realizes that if he's going to probably only be able to get this much, and this much, that he's probably going to lose little bits on the north here, and maybe cut this back, just to round this off, basically. But the town, as you can see, probably this spur will be cut off. This spur, they'll probably cut round Chavis Yar, under here, under Koromansk. Probably cut this off and go down through here. Maybe if Russia takes this within the next week. Otherwise, this will probably be cut through as well. Putin won't have much options. Ukraine won't have much options. But again, the sooner Zelensky acts, now it's only about 1%, right? So it's the difference between 18 and 19%. But still, to Zelensky, even giving up 1% is too much because he's such an arrogant narcissist, right? He thinks that everything has to go his way because he's the victim, victim mentality. I'm the victim. Yes, but you're the victim of your own crimes. So you're not a victim, okay? You are a participant in a corrupt system that allowed private militias to wage war for a decade against each other. Then the Ukrainian army sided time and time again with the militias against the people of Donbass. You are not liberators of the Donbass. You are occupiers of the Donbass, and that is how the people of Donbass majority see you. They are not rallying against Russians. They are not fleeing Russian occupation. They're not screaming out. They're not jumping into the waters and swimming across to freedom. Okay, they're throwing Ukrainians out of their homes and putting them out to Russian authorities. Okay, they don't like you anymore. The best you could do is a lasting peace by giving up that land forever, because they will never trust you while they live. It's like North Koreans don't trust South Korea. It's like South Koreans not trusting North Korea. Okay? It's like Vietnam. Until the people whose memories do not contain war, the peace is only fragile. Same with Korea, same with Vietnam, same with Cuba, same with Venezuela. The arrogance of socialism has to burn out. And Ukraine hasn't burnt out that arrogance of socialism. They only wear the skin of democracy for the sake of trade with Europe. I think that's about it. I'm sorry. I hope I haven't dragged this out too long. But I really appreciate each and every one of you. I'm just bringing in the news as it is. This is, I think, amazing that Trump is stitching together a peace deal when time and time again, I'm not just saying Putin, when I'm saying both sides have refused peace before. I'm not calling out Putin for one thing or the other, because you look at the complicated mess it is, and it's basically, in a high school analogy, it's two people who walk past each other and they always bump shoulders, and eventually they both go at the same time at each other. If you've seen it, you've seen it. You know what I mean. If you don't, it's hard to explain. But Zelensky is a hard head who is basically looking in the mirror, doesn't like what he sees, and it's even worse when he sees Putin. Okay, Zelensky just wants this war to continue so he can continue to take as much money as he can, because he's in fear of his life. When it's over, those he failed, okay, he knows he failed, and he's fearing that those he failed are going to Clintonize him. So thank you all for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. However, the Clintons aren't the only one who silence failure. Just look at the long history of disappearance of key informants and witnesses in the mafia. This is how they operate. Ukraine is a mafia state, but we don't want it to remain, and I think that's what Trump is quietly doing behind the scenes, which is why Zelensky's so resentful and resistful. I'm not saying that anybody of importance is watching what I'm doing. I'm just saying, as things unfold, what I see and what I've said in the past is coming true. And hopefully, my predictions about this war coming to an end within a month, well, supposed to happen months ago, but hopefully I'm right. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm just saying this thing runs in 6-week cycles. It takes weeks to put together diplomacy, and we're in a second stage now of a cycle. The end of the month will be the end of a 6-week cycle, and whether or not we see renewed fighting or an end to fighting is up to Zelensky. Because Putin's made the first move, it's now Zelensky's turn. So please support me on Patreon. I really need it. But of course, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, or in my profile. And of course, you can just scan the QR code on the screen. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.